The reading for our contemplation is from Maria Valtorta, Poem of the Man God, and this is the birth of our Lord Jesus. I see the inside of the poor stony shelter where Mary and Joseph have found refuge, sharing the lot of some animals. The little fire is dozing together with its guardian. Mary lifts her head slowly from her bed and looks around. She sees that Joseph's head is bowed over his chest, as if he were meditating, and she thinks that his good intention to remain awake has been overcome by tiredness. She smiles lovingly, and making less noise than a butterfly, she sits up and then goes on her knees. She prays with a blissful smile on her face. She prays with her arms stretched out almost in the shape of a cross, with the palms of her hands facing up and forward, and she never seems to tire in that position. She then prostrates herself with her face on the hay, and in an even more ardent prayer, a long prayer. Joseph rouses. He notices that the fire is almost out, and the stable almost dark. He throws a handful of very slender heath onto the fire, and the flames are revived. He then adds some thicker twigs and finally some sticks, because the cold is really biting. The cold of a serene winter night that comes into the ruins from everywhere. Poor Joseph must be frozen, sitting as he is near the door, if we can call it a door, the hole where Joseph's mantle serves as a curtain. He warms his hands near the fire, and then he takes his sandals off, and he warms his feet. When the fire is gaily blazing and its light is steady, he turns around, but he does not see anything, not even Mary's white veil that formed a clear line on the dark hay. He gets up and slowly moves toward her pallet. "Are you not sleeping, Mary?" he asks. He asks her 3 times until she turns around and replies, "I am praying." "Is there anything you need?" "No, Joseph." "Try and sleep a little. At least try and rest." "I will try, but I don't get tired praying." "God be with you, Mary." "And with you, Joseph." Mary resumes her position. Joseph, to avoid falling asleep, goes on his knees near the fire and prays. He prays with his hands pressed against his face. He removes them now. He removes them now and again to feed the fire, and then he resumes his ardent prayer. Apart from the noise of the crackling sticks and the noise made now and again by the donkey stamping its hooves on the ground, no other sound is heard. A thin ray of moonlight creeps in through a crack in the vault, and it seems a blade of unearthly silver looking for Mary. It stretches in length as the moon climbs higher in the sky, and at last it reaches her. It is now on her head, where it forms a halo of pure light. Mary lifts her head as if she had a celestial call, and she gets up. She goes onto her knees again. How beautiful it is here now. She raises her head, and her face shines in the white moonlight and becomes transfigured by a supernatural smile. What does she see? What does she hear? What does she feel? She is the only one who can tell what she saw, heard, and felt in the refulgent hour of her maternity. I can only see that the light around her is increasing more and more. It seems to come down from heaven. It seems to arise from the poor things around her. And above all, it seems to originate from herself. Her deep blue dress now seems of a pale myosotis blue, her hands and face becoming clear blue as if they were placed under the glare of a huge pale sapphire. This hue is spreading more and more on the things around her. It covers them. It purifies them. It brightens everything. It reminds me, although it is somewhat softer, of the hue I saw in the vision of holy paradise, and also the color I saw in the visit of the wise men. The light is given off more and more intensely from Mary's body. It absorbs the moonlight. She seems to be drawing to herself all the light that can descend from heaven. She is now the depositary of the light. She is to give this light to the world. And this blissful, uncontainable, immeasurable, eternal divine light, which is about to be given, is heralded by a dawn, by a morning star, by a chorus of atoms of light that increase continuously like a tide and rise more and more like incense and descend like a large stream and stretch out like veils. The vault, full of crevices, full of cobwebs, of protruding rubble, balanced by a miracle of physics, the dark, smoky, repellent vault now seems the ceiling of a royal hall. Each boulder is a block of silver, each crack an opal flash, each cobweb a most precious canopy interwoven with silver and with diamonds. A huge green lizard, hibernating between two stones, seems like an emerald jewel forgotten there by a queen, and a bunch of hibernating bats becomes like a precious chandelier. The hay from the upper manger is no longer grass blades. It is pure silver wires, quivering in the air with the grace of loose hair. The dark wood of the lower manger is a block of burnished silver. The walls are covered with a brocade in which the white silk disappears under the pearly embroidery of the relief. And the soil, it is crystal, lit up by white light. Its protrusions are like roses thrown in homage of the soil. The holes become like precious cups from which perfumes are to arise. And the light increases more and more. It is now unbearable to the eye, and the Virgin disappears in so much light, as if she had been absorbed by an incandescent curtain. And the Mother emerges. Yes, when the light becomes endurable once again to my eyes, I see Mary with the newborn son in her arms, a baby, rosy and plump, bustling with his little hands as big as rosebuds, kicking with his tiny feet that could be contained in the hollow of the heart of a rose, crying with a thin, trembling voice, just like a newborn little lamb, opening his mouth that resembles a wild strawberry, showing a tiny tongue that trembles against the rosy roof of his mouth. And he moves his little head that is so blonde that it seems without any hair, a little round head that his mother holds in the hollow of her hand, while she looks at her baby and adores him, weeping and smiling at the same time. She bends down to kiss him, not on his innocent head, but on the center of his chest, where underneath there is his little heart beating for us. One day there will be the wound. His mother is doctoring that wound in advance with her immaculate kiss. The ox, woken up by the dazzling light, gets up with the great noise of hooves and it bellows. The donkey turns its head around and brays. It is the light that rouses them, but I think that they wanted to greet their Creator, both for themselves and on behalf of all animals. So that's our passage, the birth of Jesus. And when I was meditating on this passage, which is so beautiful because it helps us see what happened, I wanted to focus on light, what it means to be a bearer of the light, to bring light into our lives. And what it means to perceive light so that we can experience miracles. What does that really mean? And in this passage, the cool thing about it is the way it's not just having a baby, obviously. I remember when I first started on the path, there was this talk about the birth of Christ within. And I thought that sounded like a really interesting idea, and I didn't know what it meant, because it sounded, what does that mean, you have a baby within? And then I obviously realized it's a metaphysical thing. But what Maria Valtorta is seeing here is what the spiritual experience would look like. That Mother Mary is bringing all the light into herself, and as Andrew talked about in one of the recent sermons, we can connect with this as this inner experience of this pure soul part of ourself that is totally open to that experience. And so she's bringing this light in, and she's changing everything around her in the process. The other beautiful vision that Valtorta has is the way this environment is dingy. It's dark, there's cobwebs, there's bats even. It changes. It becomes something that looks like a cathedral, it looks like a palace. And whether it actually changes or is it the perception that changes through the light is something that I wanted to reflect on. What happens to our perception when we bring light into a situation and into ourselves? As Diana mentioned in your sharing, we were looking yesterday at the mystical meaning of Christmas, and looking at some of the things that are familiar to us, like the way Joseph is the rational mind, and Joseph is doing what he needs to do here, and Mary is this divine soul. But then there are these other characters, there are the animals, and I hadn't really reflected too much on that, but it was very meaningful what we talked about, the way the ox and the donkey can actually represent our ego, the sort of lower nature of our being, that might have decided to not pay attention to the Christ. But instead, in this situation, everyone turns to the Christ. All attention is on this new baby and this light. And in the conversation we had the other day, we all could relate to this idea of the ego being a force that can take us off our path at times. And it's really hard to get rid of the ego. I've had different points where I felt, okay, I'm done. Not I don't have an ego, but I'm free. These things, things don't bother me. I feel like I'm connected with God. And then something will happen, and there it is. And the feeling that comes up is separation. It's a lens that separates from the Christ. It separates from the God view of things. So this image at Christmas to keep in mind is the internal experience of the birth of Christ, being receptive to this light, but also these forces in us that can steer us off our path can become the strongest servants within us. Sort of the ox and the donkey warming this baby with their breath, as opposed they were forces that could have been destructive. Instead, they become servants. So it's this beautiful idea of this inner experience of the birth of Christ. And when I was reflecting on it, I wanted to share a little of what I was thinking about with what light is. Because we talk about light all the time. And it's something that I've experienced being on the path, things coming to light, letting go of qualities in myself, changing relationships. But what is light? And so I actually looked it up. And maybe this is obvious, but I never really did much in physics. But it's an energy. Light is a really powerful energy, and what's amazing about it is that it's an energy we can see. It's an energy that we can see and that it enables us to see. So that sort of seems obvious, but it's kind of amazing, really. And it's also an energy, I learned, that behaves in really contradictory ways. So light can be at the same time a particle and a wave. And so if something is a particle, it means it has a fixed location in space. Like It's an object and it can't go through other objects, like a rock on the ground. If something is a wave, it doesn't have any fixed location. It's always in motion. A wave can go through other waves and through other things. But light can be both at the same time, which is a total contradiction and really is baffling to our minds. It's one of those things that scientists kind of understand, but they don't understand. Which is very much, I feel, when I read it, it's like, that's like God, because God can hold these contradictions in mind. Things that we can't grasp can happen in God. And it also suggests the way light brings forth miracles, the way something that is one thing can be something else at the same time. And so Mother Mary bringing this light forth and changing everything in that moment, I think that's a really helpful metaphor to keep in mind, that we're bringing the light in, we're bringing in energy, and also when we look around us, light is everywhere, whether it's a candle or turning on a lamp or being in the sun, that this very external as well as internal presence of God is a force around us constantly. And so it made me very aware of what light is. And it made me think also about how we perceive, because we need light to perceive, obviously. And light comes in through our eyes. And so if we knew, that seems very simple. Our eyes are kind of like cameras. But that's not what makes us see. What makes us see is the brain. And the reason I was thinking about this is because we make up a story in our mind. So the light comes in, and if we purely saw what is, we would be in God automatically. But we have our own minds, and we have a history. And what we see, yes, we all see, okay, we're in a room with chairs. But how I interpret it, what my eye picks up on, is purely based on who I am and my own background and my own history. We could both look at the same object, and one person could say, oh, well, that's kind of a dingy, beat-up chair. And the other person can say, oh, that's a really well-loved piece of furniture. It's all the background we attribute to it. So why is that helpful to be aware of? It's helpful to realize why what is on the inside creates what's on the outside. That's something we always talk about in the path, but really, why is that? And it helped me see that there's a physical, material level at which what I literally see is made up by my brain. And that means it can change once I know the filter that I'm looking through. And so the filters that we see through are those things like fear and anger and pride. And fear is a big one because if you've ever been a kid who's afraid of the dark, what you see in the dark is something that you make up stories about because you don't have the full picture. And those are the experiences in life where we react, we make up a story, and then we shut down. And the filter of anger, what we see is I gotta defend myself, I've gotta protect myself. If I could take off this filter, I would fully see what's out there, but we don't fully see, we see through a lens too often. However, with this idea, the ideal of bringing forth the light, as Mother Mary is doing, and as if all the parts within us could, for that moment, and ideally in an ongoing way, turn toward the light. If the ego and the mind and everybody said, okay, I am putting this baby forward as most important. I think the other thing that resonates is the way when Valtorta sees this birth, she sees Mary as a virgin first, which is she's representing the pure part of us, the very receptive part. And then she becomes a mother. And that seems, well, of course she just had a baby, but if you look at it in a spiritual sense, if we are a mother to this Christ part of us, it's new. It needs to be protected, and it is amazing that the Christ came in as a baby. As we were talking about the other day, he could have made other choices. And instead he came in as vulnerable, needing protection, and small at first. And so the mothering part of us needs to protect this and nurture it. And what we do to help our ego and all the other parts get on board is important. I wanted to share a story. And it's about one of the worst Christmases ever, but it's not something that I experienced. It was a story that came to me that I heard. And it resonates with this idea of what happens when we perceive things through a filter and how to open to the possibility of forgiveness. And this is a true story. There's a family, and took place in like about 1950. And they didn't have any money at Christmas, like very little. It was like the dad just lost his job, the mom just lost a job, and they didn't have money for a Christmas tree. And there's a kid who had a paper route. And so he kind of had this idea like, well, we can't get a tree, and the mom is saying like, well, we don't really need a tree. It's not that, it's just a waste of money anyway. And so the kid says, well, I think if we got a tree, I feel like it would be better. I know we don't need it, but I feel like it would help. And so he managed to get some money, like $8 from his paper route. And he went to the tree lot, and there was this one tree left that was supposed to be $10, but he got it for the $8 that he had, which was all the money that he had. And the guy selling the tree says, all right, well, you can have it for $8. And he lugged it home about a mile in the snow. And when he got home, he looked at this tree, and this was just like a kid, maybe like 10 years old. And he thought, this is going to change everything, because I bought this with the money that I had, and I brought it home, and this is going to make everyone happy. It's going to, like, I did it on my own. It's going to make everyone, it's going to change everything. And something really different happened. Like, his mom opened the door, and she looked at it, and she was furious with him. And she said, what kind of stupid decision was that? We're not bringing it inside. We're going to leave it outside to remind us that the stupid decisions we've made financially have led to this situation. And that was that was like the worst Christmas he ever had as a kid. His dad came around and said, well, let's bring it inside. We'll put the tree in the front room, and, we'll kind of get through. And then, life went on, and he got over it. And then later, he wrote this story because before she died, his mom remembered this. Like, she wasn't the type of person who really had much consciousness, who really realized how she was talking to somebody. And she remembered it, and she reached out to him and said, I need to tell you that all of these years it's bothered me, that what I did on that Christmas. And she said, I didn't see it till now. I didn't see it. I saw that I was so afraid of what was going to happen to our family, that we were going to lose our house, that you wouldn't be able to go to school. I was so angry at your father because he was spending all the money on drinking and whatever. And she said, at that moment, I felt I was protecting you and protecting our family. But from this child's perspective, it was heartbreaking. But he really, in the way he wrote the story, he forgave his mom, and it was the miracle was not what happened with the tree, which was what he was thinking it would be. This was going to be the miracle. I'll bring this tree and everything will be great. But it was that years later, his mom could see, and he could forgive. And in order to forgive, both people had to perceive what the other felt like. And that's one of those basic things, but as humans, I think in some ways that's for me this year, one of the meanings of Christmas, to not just understand myself, to understand and see myself clearly, and understand and see others clearly, but really, really try to feel what is another person's experience, because only then can I really have compassion. And only through that empathy can we really not only bring light to it, but bring the love. And the love is, I want to know what your experiences. Why did you get so mad? For the mom, why did you go get that tree without permission? And that was a beautiful moment. That was healing for them. And when I read that story, I remember thinking like, oh, okay, that's exactly the parent I don't want to be. I mean, I grew up in a family that was sometimes really reactive and not always very nurturing. And so I did a lot of work to be different than that. But when I had kids, I found out I still needed to do more work. And one of the things that I found helpful, which I wanted to share, is this idea of catch people being good. Like instead of catching them being bad, catch them being good. And even as an internal perspective, because recently I found that helpful to myself, because we can be really critical on a path because we want to improve. We want to get better. We want to change things. And when I had to use this technique was with my older son, Max, because I hadn't had kids before. And he was very strong-willed as a little kid. And all toddlers are strong-willed, but Max was like, kind of took it to another level. And, you know, there would be times when it's like, he wanted to push the stroller somewhere where we weren't going to go. And he's just a little kid, but I would be in this real standoff with him, like a real power struggle. And my aunt, who kind of has some wisdom, came to visit. And she was looking at me in one of these struggles. And she just looked at me and she said something that really cut through it and was some real sight. She said, you know, is this about him or is this about you or about him? And I realized in that moment, it's like, oh, it's kind of about me. I mean, and so I didn't have the sight to see what he needed. And so bringing this back to the idea of light and what it means to nurture the light within us, the more light we have, the more love we have, because the more we can see not only what is this person doing wrong, but what do they need? What is this, for me as a mom, it was, what is this child what's his positive intention that's triggering me in a way? How can I help him? And so I got better at that, and my kids have mostly been brought up to feel like they can express themselves and not be shot down. But we always have blind spots. And so the other blind spot I had was in my marriage. You know, to my kids, I would be like, oh, catch them being good. Didn't do that with my husband. However, there are always miracles. And recently I've had an opportunity to see myself pretty clearly, more clearly, I should say. And what I realized was I had changed so much that we almost didn't like each other anymore. I had changed, he didn't. And I thought that was it. That's not going to work. But then I realized something, which was I had not really, at a certain point, had enough compassion for him. Which doesn't mean that we excuse any type of behavior, but it means that once you see yourself, you have to make amends. And so I took that upon myself, and it was received. And I think I'm sharing this because what was helpful was to realize that if we hold in mind what someone's best self could be, especially relationships that we have over many years, whether it's friendships or people we work with, or if you have a family, you know, over many years, it can be really difficult as we change to be kind to each other, to be nurturing of each other, but also to continue to grow. How do you grow alongside someone else? And one of the things that I think is helpful is just to have this idea in your mind when it's difficult in a relationship. What is the highest self? What is the highest good in this person? There's one more thing I wanted to share with you, and it's about miracles and the way perception relates to miracles. And this is from the book A Course in Miracles, which is a really interesting book. And it says, a miracle is a correction. It looks on devastation, and it reminds the mind that what it sees is false. A miracle inverts perception, which was upside down before, and thus it ends the strange distortions that were manifest. Now, perception is open to the truth. Now, forgiveness is seen as justified. Forgiveness is the home of miracles. The eyes of Christ deliver them to all they look upon in mercy and love. Perception stands corrected in His sight, and what was meant to curse instead comes to bless. Each lily of forgiveness offers all the world the silent miracle of love, and each is laid before the Word of God upon the universal altar to the Creator and creation in the light of perfect purity and endless joy.